As we have illustrated in the new presidency, NAWAPA, the North American Water and Power Lines, will be the keystone for a much-needed nationwide recovery in the United States. It will employ millions of Americans under a great project that represents more than just work. It represents employing mankind to act as co-creator on Earth. The millions of currently unemployed Americans will be tasked to embark on a great mission with this water project to reorganize the functions of life on our North American continent, especially plant life, increasing the photosynthetic potential, transforming climates, and shifting existing weather patterns which could have positive implications throughout the globe. In this video presentation, we will focus on how the new presidency in a post-Obama world can use NAWAPA as a new standard for international cooperation. The vision as proposed by LaRouche and his science research team calls for a NAWAPA extended, which will first, by the necessity of the original NAWAPA project, bring us in cooperation with Canada and Mexico. However, the full extent of the international NAWAPA will come to bear through a leading initiative set forth by the United States without Obama, Russia, and China. With the initiative of these three nations, this new standard for international collaboration will extend uninterrupted into every major continent of the globe, from the North to the South Pole. We will now examine 4 specific projects, each representing a different region of the world. The case studies begins with Africa, to be followed by Central Asia, Central and South America, and concluding with the development of the Arctic region. All of these regional proposals already exist on paper, awaiting execution. The only holdup lies with us in the United States and the implementation of a new presidency. If the United States chooses to set the standard with NAWAPA here under an international fixed exchange rate credit system, global development can finally become a reality.
Once Obama is removed from office and a return to the Glass-Steagall policy is enacted, a serious flood of potential will be unleashed on this planet. You may have heard of NAWAPA by now, but you haven't heard the end of it.
Once the flow of hyperinflationary bailouts and financial mechanisms from the United States is dried up by the Glass-Steagall policy, Europe will then have no choice but to return to a system of individual sovereign nation-states, ending the Euro system and instead acting together with a unity of principle towards the future. Then the challenge for Europe will not just be the rebuilding of European nations, but the transformation of the African continent into a self-sustaining, integrated industrial whole, capable of bringing its millions out of poverty. That will be the moral test for the nations of Europe, whose history of colonialism in Africa has brought about the most dire of circumstances on the planet. Today, the British Empire still dominates that process, with other nations of Europe acting as junior partners in looting opportunities fueled by environmentalist lies. With the United States dominated by policies in the tradition of Franklin Roosevelt, our nation's foreign policy will be geared towards facilitating the tendency both in Europe and in Africa towards continental development. This approach, as understood by Roosevelt, was the key to overthrowing British imperialism as expressed by Winston Churchill. This would be done not through throwaway projects based on old, inadequate, or green technologies, but through the integration of the continent of Africa as a whole, and the utilization of the most advanced technologies such as nuclear power, high-speed and maglev rail, and the most advanced agricultural techniques irrigated by some of the largest water projects on the planet. The process of the redistribution of water throughout the continent of Africa, in the same vein as NAWAPA, would have transformative effects on the climate globally. The introduction of green plant life, where currently the ability to sustain life is not feasible, would have a profound effect on a deadly transatlantic cycle towards the generation of hurricanes, as we in the United States are seeing in the present moment. 3 specific projects that could be begun right away for the creation of abundant water for agriculture and sustenance of human life would be the extension of the Nile, the channeling of the underground rivers of the Sahara, and the development of the Trans-Aqua project for the replenishment of Lake Chad. The Nile River already exists, harnessed by a series of dams and water projects, one of which irrigates about 2 million acres of farmland between the Blue and the White Nile. As Sudan's lands are among the most fertile in the world, rapidly increasing the capability for irrigation could turn it into a breadbasket for the entire continent. The Jonglei Canal project, which currently lies fallow, could be revived to rapidly expand this potential, diverting water that runs into swamps instead into the White Nile for agriculture. Far to the west of the Nile are the barren salt flats of Algeria and Tunisia, under which exist ancient underground rivers trapped in the sandstone waiting to be tapped. A massive underground body of water named the Mega Lake exists in this area, equivalent to the size of our Lake Erie. This lake could supply water to thousands of wells across these 2 countries. In addition, plans have been drawn up for reflooding of seawater into the salt flats of Algeria and the Qatar Depression that would have a profound impact on cooling the climate of the region. But Africa, of course, is not only home to barren and dry climates. Lake Chad in the Sahel region of Africa was once the 6th largest freshwater lake in the world, but is now drying up. To its south, the Congo River is the 3rd most abundant river in the world. As a result of the lack of sufficient development, it is often flooded. Rather than allowing this cycle of flooding to occur, Trans-Aqua would create a new river that would divert water north through 2 catchment basins and into Lake Chad. The total flow of this new river will consist of 81 million acre-feet per year, with the potential to produce 4 gigawatts of hydroelectric power. The whole stretch of this new river would be 1,750 miles in total, about half of the length of the United States, and will be on average 80 feet deep and 330 feet wide, making it navigable and generating the first inland seaport in Africa. Once the water refills the Chad Basin, new agricultural development will blossom in the region, covering 12 to 17 million acres of irrigated farming. Today, Africa does not have the industrial capability and skilled labor in order to implement these massive projects. However, it would not take much time at all to end the problem of hunger and bring to Africa the skills to industrialize and unify their nations. Europe to their north has some of the most densely industrialized centers in all the world. As part of a crash development program, Europe could apply its already existing skilled labor to assist in building these projects and bring to young Africans the prospect of building up their nations and defeating colonialism in the decades to come. As Franklin Roosevelt spoke during the Casablanca Conference in Morocco, "Wealth," he said, "imperialists just don't realize what they can do, what they can create. They've robbed these continents of billions, and all because they were too short-sighted to understand that their billions were pennies compared to the possibilities. Possibilities that must include a better life for the people who inhabit this land."
The Aral Sea has seen a dramatic shrinking since the 1960s and 70s. The desiccation of the sea has destroyed the fishing industry, but has also adversely impacted weather in the surrounding region, which is now plagued by salt storms. Is this region, with some of the most fertile soil in Central Asia supposed to be a desert?
Central Asia, an impoverished region of the world known for its extreme climate and severely arid conditions. Here, the developmental prospects, we can say, are numerous and much overdue. But for our purposes, let us take up the case study of the depleted Aral Sea. The Aral Sea Basin, a water system which reaches every country in Central Asia, was once a reliable source of clean water and irrigation for the region's population. The Aral Sea itself, which was once one of the 4 largest lakes in the world, in addition to having been the source of a once thriving fishing industry, also played a crucial role in climate moderation in a widely parched Central Asia. But decades of backwards monoculture, specifically of cotton, wasteful water diversion canals from the Soviet era, and subsequent free trade policies, acutely depleted the river systems which had fed and replenished the Aral Sea. As a result, over the course of a few short decades, the sea has now declined to 10% of its original size, and without the constant inflow of fresh water, it has become highly salinated, to the point where all 23 species of fish which had once inhabited the Aral Sea have now died off. Today, the depleted Aral Sea Basin qualifies as a humanitarian emergency, not only creating a severe lack of fresh water for its dependent population, but having transformed from a large body of water into a salt wasteland, windstorms often pick up the salt and pummel the surrounding areas of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, making agriculture increasingly difficult and harming human health. Life expectancy is shorter the closer you get to the Aral Sea. The child mortality rate is 75 children per 1,000 newborn. And in the Karakhal, Pakistan region, the epicenter of the crisis, a high level of maternity deaths is observed at 120 women per 10,000 births. In addition, due to increased salt storms and the exposure of food and people to water and air increasingly contaminated by harmful levels of salts and toxins, diseases such as tuberculosis, infections and parasites, typhus, hepatitis, and paratyphoid have dramatically increased. According to a 2002 UN estimate, every day, 200,000 tons of salt and toxic sand are carried by the wind throughout the Aral Sea region and thousands of miles beyond, sometimes reaching as far as Russia's Arctic north. No doubt, this is a truly ecological and humanitarian crisis. The issue which we must confront is that this was a disaster directed by policy. After more than a century of backwards agriculture and resource and human exploitation, culminating in today's system of globalization and cheap slave labor, the Aral Sea crisis is the result of a deliberate downgrade of the region's biosphere and people. With the removal of Barack Obama from the presidency, the reenactment of Glass-Steagall, and the implementation of an international fixed exchange rate credit system led by the United States, we can effectively push back the imperial policies which had ruined entire regions like Central Asia, and extend to them the NAWAPA perspective. Like the North America Water and Power Lines, designed for North America, and the Transaqua Irrigation Project for Africa discussed in previous segments, reviving the Aral Sea and upgrading Central Asia in general will be a monumental endeavor, bound to test the limits of human ingenuity. One proposal which we here at LaRouchesupport have highlighted is a project proposed in the 1940s by Russian engineer M.M. Davidov, and which has since been modified, to replenish the Aral Sea by way of water diversion from a source thousands of kilometers away in the Altai Mountains, seated where Russia, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan all meet. This area has anomalously high precipitation and is the source of the Ob and Irtysh rivers, both of which run westward and meet before they drain off into the Arctic. The proposal calls for damming the Ob and Irtysh where they meet, saving 8% of the runoff water which would otherwise go into the ocean, to create a reservoir of fresh water. The water in the reservoir is then channeled via a 2,550-kilometer long canal, lifted a total of 300 feet through a system of 6 pumps, and into the Aral Sea it goes. With the Aral Sea replenished, fishery can be rejuvenated. Agriculture can be expanded to produce for Eurasian and Russian consumption, as 4.5 million hectares of irrigable land would be made available. In general, life in the region will be made more pleasant with the cessation of salt dust storms, and the vast greening process will surely moderate the region's extreme climate conditions. Furthermore, the transformation of the Aral Sea could be coupled with other developmental endeavors in the region, such as other proposed canal and transportation corridors. For example, this process will be dramatically augmented in the context of bridging the Bering Strait. A series of new northern rail lines and corridors will connect our newly replenished Central Asia with a North America freshly transformed by the NAWAPA. And with a commitment between our friends to the south and a new presidency here in the United States, this international connection can reach the tip of Argentina uninterrupted with the taming of the Darien Gap.
South America and the other nations of the Americas are completely disconnected if we think of this question from the standpoint of LaRouche's concept of cultural economic platforms. No efficient transportation of people on paved roads is possible, let alone the transportation of industrial goods by
Today,
rail.
the appendage of the British Empire, known as the World Wildlife Fund, which is committed to a no-development policy for the region, is a major impediment. Currently, the area encompassing Darien Gap is deemed a biosphere reserve that cannot be traversed by road or rail, but is traversed by thousands of narco-terrorists who use these grounds as a hideout to traffic drugs, commit murders, and kidnappings. However, there are unique projects that could and should be carried out in this region to put an end to this plague of British imperialism for good. The first step of the program will be to complete the 62-mile Pan-American highway connection between Yavista and Chigaroro. American engineer and ALPAC collaborator Hal Cooper has already proposed 3 possible routes. One through the wetlands, a second by the eastern coast, and a third to be a possible bridge over the Gulf of Urabá. In each case, the terrain provides grave challenges, but challenges we are willing to accept. Currently, the only place for shipping goods through the region remains the Panama Canal, so, to allow for a greater density of goods to be shipped, a second canal must be built. The Atrato-Truando Canal is one of several possible routes. Half of it would utilize part of the Atrato River in Colombia, and the other half could be created by using peaceful nuclear explosions. Next, the Colombia and Venezuela rail lines will need to be extended and upgraded with maglev, particularly to handle those high-altitude mountainous ranges. The same upgrading will be done to the Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil rail systems. All of these will then be linked to a new Argentinian-Chilean rail system, then down finally southern Patagonia. This grid will supplement the integration of the 3 major river systems of the region, the Orinoco, the Amazon, and the Rio de la Plata. No need to be startled. This region has been transformed by the hand of man before. It has been shown that in the last 12,000 years, astronomically advanced societies terraformed thousands of square miles of the Amazon. These early civilizations used advanced agricultural methods to engineer a highly fertile black soil in as much as 10% of the Amazon, an area about the size of France. It's a known fact that cloud formation in the Amazon is heavily affected by vegetation on the ground, and that this, in turn, affects weather patterns, not only in the region, but around the globe. by reintroducing the hand of man as gardener and terraformer in this region, we will come to better understand how the entire biosphere functions and perhaps craft new weather systems for the benefit of man. Finally, there are vast mineral deposits throughout the region, such as iron, copper, nickel, and plenty of uranium to fuel new nuclear power plants, which currently only exist in Brazil and Argentina. Given the right kind of economic development, with these vast resources and the already existing capabilities therein, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil could be the productive axis that could develop the rest of the lacking energy needs of South America. Argentina and Brazil's activity in particular should be directed towards space. For instance, the best place for launching rockets into space is near the equator because it has the greatest angular momentum, and in fact, Alcantara, Brazil, is currently home to the closest launch center to the equator, and Argentina, among other things, already has remnants of a significant aerospace sector. Breakthroughs in new rocket fusion technology and isolated astrobiology fieldwork, which is already being pursued in Chile, could become commonplace in the region, not to mention the fact that the aurora australis in the South Pole is not that far away, the study of which becomes increasingly relevant as we enter into this heightened period of terrestrial disturbances caused by extraterrestrial electromagnetic activity. Here is the plan for this region of the globe, and as we said before, would represent an international perspective that would have to be led by the United States. Here is the urgent need for removing Obama from the presidency and enacting Glass-Steagall. With that, we can accomplish anything we set our minds to. Without it, we are doomed, and that sooner than you might think.
Having set this process into motion, we can then turn to some of the questions whose answers have deeper implications for the continued existence of man.
Throughout the last several 100 million years, the Earth has been subject to a number of glaciations. Roughly 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, the land currently beneath the Bering Strait was exposed due to lower sea levels caused by much of the ocean water being locked up in ice caps. This passageway once provided an overland transport route for both human beings and animals. But the warming trend that began at the end of the last glaciation period, around 10,000 years ago, flooded the area with water and severed this land connection. Today, we have the option of connecting it once again. The project of building a bridge across the Bering Strait is not for the faint-hearted. The Bering Strait spans 65 miles of the most hostile climate to life on our planet. There are wind chills that drop the temperature to almost minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and 8 months out of the year, the Bering Strait is covered with ice floes, which can be as large as 250,000 tons. Its 65 miles would be over double the length of the longest bridge on the planet today, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway just outside New Orleans. The causeway is 24 miles long, and it runs through a moderate climate and over calm waters. The existing plans for the passageway are to incorporate a double-tracked electrified rail line. This will either be in the form of a bridge or a tunnel. The passageway will hit both the Little and Big Diomede Islands. Accompanying the rail line will be a paved road, a gas pipeline, and an electric transmission line. This bridge would support over 150 trains a day, adding up to a total of over 350 tons of metric freight per year. The challenges posed in the construction of the Bering Bridge are conquerable, if we choose to do it. And that's a good thing, because the bridge is only one of the critical parts of the extended NAWAPA program in the Arctic. Next is the challenge of overland transport. The nations which surround the Arctic are Norway, Denmark, the United States, Canada, and Russia. The Bering Strait Bridge will connect two continents, North America and Asia. But simply building a bridge to modern-day Siberia by itself is really not the point. Instead, the connection will serve as a critical junction point between the two sides of the Great Pacific. Russia covers 17 million square kilometers and 11 time zones. Siberia is a behemoth. At 13 million square kilometers, it is almost one-third of the entire area of Asia, and its harsh weather makes it a substantial challenge to any overland transport development in the Great Pacific. For centuries, Russia has faced the challenge of how to develop and populate Siberia with cities and industry, or whether to use it merely for extraction of raw materials. In the late 1800s, with the construction of the Trans-Siberian Rail Line, more people began to move beyond the Ural Mountains and into the vast Far East, starting the first Siberian industry. During World War II, preparing for the invasion of Hitler, Stalin moved thousands of manufacturing plants behind the Urals. Siberian development continued to be promoted within the Soviet Union in the 1950s through to the 1980s, but especially after the breakup of the USSR and the adoption of the free market economics in the 90s, people moved away and the area has suffered a recent depopulation. Today, 38 million people, only 26.5% of Russia's population, and about the population of the state of California, live in the area from the Ural Mountains eastward, including Siberia, which encompasses 77% of Russia's landmass. In order to support human life and to attract people to want to live in the area, certain economic preconditions will have to be met. Russia has already started planning new rail lines in the Far East, with a new 975-mile-long line extending from Tinda, a town and station along the Baikal-Amur main line, known as the Second Trans-Siberian Railway, to the capital of the Sakha Republic Yakutia, the city of Yakutsk, and then on to Magadan on Russia's Pacific coast. The extension of this track to Uelin on the Bering Strait is to be completed by 2030. But with the United States under NAWAPA working with Russia, this timescale will be reduced dramatically. This transport buildup must occur in conjunction with development of science centers along the already built Trans-Siberian route. One such critical center is the Vostochny Cosmodrome. The spaceport, which will be completed in 2018, will be a launch site for the Russian space program. It's located along the Baikal-Amur main line. The Amur region with the Cosmodrome is right in the hub of Asia. It sits right along Russia's border with China and has rail access to the Far East, as well as to the port city of Vladivostok. With the line from Tinda through to Uelin and the Bering Strait, the rail lines of the nations of Russia, China, Japan, North Korea, and South Korea will be connected to the United States and Canada as well. This great Pacific region will be the new center in the world, with 3 billion people and growing, as well as huge amounts of natural resources. The Arctic is rich in untapped potential. Siberia alone contains 90% of the world's palladium, 80% of its tantalum, 40% of its platinum, 36% of the nickel, and the list goes on. These minerals, including petroleum, are already used for energy production, fuel cells, chemical manufacturing, and medicines in the chemotherapy drugs oxaliplatin and carboplatin. But this is without mentioning the future importance of them under a science driver policy like NAWAPA. One of the major engineering challenges of building in the Arctic is the ability of machinery to resist breaking and corroding due to the temperatures in snow. Tantalum is a metal which has an anti-corrosive property, which will be critical in experimenting with new metal alloys which can resist buckling from exposure. Platinum is a metal which might have extraterrestrial origins. It's found in limited areas on Earth with higher abundances at large body impact sites like the Sudbury Basin in Canada and sites all over Siberia. The metal is found in the craters created and affected by post-impact volcanic activity. We know that it is also found in higher quantities on the Moon. The Arctic Ocean floor is also rich in hydrocarbons. All of the Arctic nations have claimed territorial rights to the North Pole for shipping and for the untapped wealth of the sea bottom. Russia, in a recent trip to the North Pole, just planted their flag at the bottom of the ocean. And in a joint effort by the United States Geological Survey and the Canadian Coast Guard, exploration and data about the nature and boundaries of the continental shelf of the Arctic is being collected. Overall, the data from the United States-Canada study estimates that the area north of the Arctic Circle accounts for about 13% of the undiscovered oil, 30% of the undiscovered natural gas, and 20% of the undiscovered natural gas liquids in the world. The presence of large amounts of hydrocarbons in this area will always be a source of energy. But these hydrocarbons also raise a much more significant question about the nature of life. This is what makes the Arctic the most important feature of the extended NAWAPA. The floor of the Arctic Ocean is a marine desert. In the deep waters, which are under perpetual ice cover, there is very little or no photosynthesis. And with little organic matter coming from anywhere, life is more sparse here than anywhere else. But life has evolved to exist without photosynthesis, from the methane and hydrogen sulfide which seep from the bottom of the Arctic. There are many species of organisms which have bacteria inside them which can consume the methane and hydrogen sulfide and turn it into energy. There is another source of energy besides the vents. In 1995, a team of American, Norwegian, and Russian scientists found an active cold seep mud volcano in the Barents Sea. They noticed thin white blankets draped over rocks and piles of sediment. These white blankets were actually colonies of millions of bacteria which live on the sediment, digesting the organic matter in them, and producing methane as a byproduct. In the seeps, methane dissolved in water bubbles up through the ocean and is ingested by the bacteria. One of the most recent finds of life actually occurred at the other pole. A NASA team of polar researchers drilled a long hole into an ice sheet, expecting to test their ice drilling techniques. To their surprise, they found a liciniacid amphipod, a distant relative to a shrimp, alive and well in sub-freezing dark water, 600 feet from the surface of an ice sheet and 12 miles away from open ocean. These scientists came to the conclusion, if life could survive here, it was possible that it also exists on Europa, a moon of Jupiter, whose surface is also covered by a sheet of ice and has similar conditions to the poles of the Earth. Right now, there are isolated United States and Russian research stations existing in the Arctic, some floating on ice floes and others deep inland sitting on tundra. These North Pole stations carry out programs of complex year-round research in the fields of geophysics, hydrochemistry, hydrophysics, and marine biology. They experiment with the magnetic field and the ionosphere. They take regular measurements of the ice floes to keep track of both the direction and speed. Usually, one of these stations begins operations in April and will continue for 2 or 3 years until the ice floe reaches the Greenland Sea. Scientists and explorers are rotated yearly. Man will travel to Mars, and if we're going to make it and survive, we must know how to keep life alive in outer space and on the planet itself. Before we can get there, we still need to answer a number of questions about what makes the Earth suitable for life. As of now, we know that the atmosphere plays a protective role. On Earth, the atmosphere is a dense mix of oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. Mars's atmosphere is less dense, made up mostly of carbon dioxide, which is currently thought to be unsuitable for animal respiration, but is suitable for plants. Magnetic fields also have an effect on life. The poles of the planet are a good place to test this relationship. In comparison, the magnetic field on Mars is weak and not unified across the entire planet. The temperature extremes are an important factor as well. In the Arctic, during the winter months, the temperature can approach minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chills. The temperature of Mars varies between 70 degrees Fahrenheit at the equator to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit at its poles in winter. And finally, notice the polygonal ground patterns which are characteristic of the permafrost in the Arctic. These patterns come from water freezing and unfreezing, causing cracking in the surface. These polygonal shapes are also visible on many parts of the Martian surface. Building on permafrost will do more to prepare us for facing the surface of Mars than any Mars analog research station will. The challenges that humanity faces in the Arctic will help to prepare us for engineering the Martian surface. We must take advantage of the unique characteristics provided to us by the Earth's polar region. The power of man is limitless under the collaborative effort of Russia, China, and the United States under NAWAPA.
What we have just reviewed are only parts of what we can accomplish as a whole throughout the globe via an extended NAWAPA orientation. There are existent prospects for large-scale development in China, in a largely impoverished India, in war-torn Southwest Asia, among other regions not included in this report. Again, if the United States takes the first step with the removal of Barack Obama, the re-implementation of the Glass-Steagall Act, and the establishment of a worldwide fixed exchange rate credit system, we can do this. With the initiation of cooperation between our United States, Russia, and China, we will have the power to do this. As we outlined in the conclusion of our Arctic segment, this outlook can serve as the springboard for all of mankind to resume its rightful role in our extraterrestrial imperative. Juxtapose this vision to the current system of British-imposed financial ruin and slavery in virtually every nation on this planet. The choice is ours to make.